Eugene is a little girl who grew up as an orphan, having lost both her parents and is currently struggling to become a full-time employee. While walking down the street, she saw a dog being walked by a wealthy man, and the sight made her stop and fall into her thoughts. Unfortunately, this was the very reason she was hit by a truck. What seemed like the end of her life turned into an unexpected twist as she found herself transmigrated into a captive game called the Golden Cage. The character she transmigrated into was a small girl with platinum hair, a side character destined to be killed by the prince in the early part of the game. Exhausted by her tough and hard-working life, she decided from the moment she met the prince that she would become his pet instead of the main female character. And so, woof woof woof. With her ability to bark like a real dog, she successfully caught the prince's attention and was officially recruited to become the prince's dog. Eugene, now holding the title of the royal dog, finally experienced a comfortable and luxurious life like a real pet. However, another problem arose. The crazed prince from the original game, who always feared his dog might one day run away, was someone who cared too little. "What's wrong with you, my adorable Eugene?" Along with those words, he would just stand there, gently gazing at her with warm eyes. "Oh dear, should I pretend to run away?" Thus began a fierce struggle for Eugene to secure a truly comfortable and prosperous life as a pet. Although I'm not an animal, I am now the main character of this golden cage. To become the perfect protagonist according to the principle, today I will continue to escape. According to the principle, today she would have quickly jumped down from the wall. The master would only run after her, saying to come down quickly and continuing to apologize. But rather he would have to carry her down, and she was seething with feelings of betrayal and obsession. He would also have to say in a cold voice, "Put on this coat or you'll catch a cold." However, according to the principle, there was no scene of putting on a cloak, even though it was very warm. But if following the principle, she had to say she would run away today. Yet after saying it, she felt so embarrassed. After all, this is just a game, and if you make the right choice, everything will follow the correct progression. But he apologized for feeling he had oppressed her too much and said she could go out tomorrow. However, she felt that this person wasn't speaking according to what was said in the game, so she had to return in frustration. Because she said she didn't like the golden cage, he said he would give her a water trove tomorrow. She didn't know where she went wrong, but since it was cold, they needed to go inside first to talk. Although she was caught today, she would never think this would crush her spirit. She would regain her freedom, yet she was still sitting in a warm room. According to the principle, being his pet would mean she would run away. The prince, brimming with mischievousness, would then stir up his possessive obsession from childhood. But why were his eyes so warm, making it hard for her to break free? Despite everything, they were not in an obsessive relationship to the point of slaughtering each other. She never hoped for that level of obsession, but the prince was always very attached to her. She was caught and tried to run away, but now she saw him smiling kindly at her. This male lead, she didn't understand what was wrong with him. While she struggled to escape, he spoke as if he enjoyed it. This scene was about him taking her away to confirm his feelings, and all the servants knew the two were angry with each other. They lay next to each other to sleep, but she pushed him away in disgust. He took her hand and bit it, but it wasn't as pretty as a red puppy paw, and there was no dog nose here. She didn't understand why, in principle, he didn't look as sad as in real life, so she was very angry. Unexpectedly, he pushed her down, and now she felt he was very handsome. This action was extremely ambiguous, and she was surprised at how the cruel tyrant prince had disappeared since then. Unexpectedly, these things were written into the report by our main female character, making the boss very angry and throwing the pile of papers at her. The atmosphere was cold and gloomy, and her colleague continued to berate her. After entering a private room, he laughed and said that she had worked very hard to contain the team leader's wrath. But she didn't want to do that and wanted to leave everything behind. Following the manager's instructions, she revised the draft, amended the comments into text, and attached additional documents. She waited for the old manager to speak directly, so she waited until now. But her colleague said that it didn't matter if she was about to leave. Then he said that the company would not hire female employees. Hearing this, she was very shocked because it came directly from the HR department. She would only be a contract employee and would have to leave after a short period. While he continued working there, she didn't necessarily need to cause outrage in this place. She didn't understand why she still had to endure this. These employees pretended to bully new employees. The team leader had a grumpy temperament, and the incompetent manager was utterly garbage. She tried to endure to the best of her ability, wanting to get a permanent employee card and become a true office worker. She wanted to do this to show her deceased parents, and now she felt so foolish. She didn't even think that the company was just exploiting employees and then discarding them. At this moment, she recalled the things she had drawn in the story about healthy snacks for dogs made from premium beef. This was the financial world of dogs, and people said that dogs would inherit the houses their owners owned. She felt so jealous because she couldn't even afford a small office in her life. Speaking of house hunting, could it be the beginning of searching for gifts once again? If she were reincarnated, she would also want to become a dog in a rich household, just lying there and doing nothing, not having to think complex thoughts or try hard. She was burying her face in her phone playing a pet dog game, but carelessly she was hit by a car. She thought everything was truly over. But unexpectedly, her phone was accessing a special event in the game. Now she really didn't have to do anything, and when she opened her eyes, she was in an ancient cage filled with pet dogs. She was given a bowl of water, and looking into it, she saw that she had white hair. She quickly felt much better. The person in front of her had brown hair and blue eyes. First of all, the wrecked ears indicated the main character of the game Golden Cage, whose name was Canis. She realized that the prince had not yet appeared because he was obsessed to the point of having to imprison her. The famous character was a madman in the game. At this moment, the person opposite asked why she was so calm. If it was the white-haired character next to the main character, this was clearly a side character abandoned by her parents. A side character not even mentioned by name, as she was killed by the prince right at the beginning in front of Canis as a punishment. Although that was just a character in this game, that prince was no ordinary person either. She truly thought she was in the game, and now wondered if she should give herself a nickname. She decided on the name Eugen because it wasn't hard to pronounce, so it should be fine. Canis thought the name was nice, and the two of them laughed and talked happily together. Canis wanted to hear her story of how she got here. Everyone here had shared their stories, and in this way she could find a way to get out of this place. It was okay if she only remembered vaguely. Whatever she recalled, Canis immediately wanted to hear that story. This was the slave shop in the first episode, and Canis was trying to find a way to escape. As predicted, Canis was the main character, but Eugen didn't know much more than that at this moment. The main character had now appeared. If this was the slave shop, then when this person appeared, all the events would begin. That person was Prince Michael. He saw her sitting right in front of him and asked what this strange thing was. The two looked at each other, but Canis quickly lunged forward and growled in front of him. He only felt that this place had many strange things and asked the owner what that was. That's a little animal without an owner, belonging to the wolf breed. If you train it well, it will be very loyal and intelligent. The time for choice had come, and seeing Canis dare to bare her teeth and bark at him, he found it very interesting. The end of the game was decided depending on his choice. This beautifully illustrated event would offer two choices for Canis's life. Ignored after the prince lost interest and left, she would be thrown out of the door as punishment for causing a commotion. Or, after barking, the final choice would also result in imprisonment. In reality, this was just a game with a bad ending, no matter which option was chosen. Participants in the game enjoyed collecting many different captivity endings, but the main character surely suffered in the pursuit of freedom. Having a life trapped in a golden cage without being able to do anything was truly pitiful. She also wished she could be reincarnated as a dog in such a wealthy family. But unexpectedly, she also barked, and the owner had to explain that it was actually a human. It would be crazy if it was something only the main character could do, but she had already died once, and failing again wouldn't be the worst. Never mind, she would decide everything her way. He said that her appearing before him not as a beast man was ridiculous. This was much more interesting, so it became his first choice. Now it was time for him to make a choice, and this prince only wanted to treat them like objects. It wouldn't be a bad idea to raise an ignorant golden dog, so she was quickly taken away. She could choose the events even if she wasn't the main character. She remembered all the necessary events for the ending, so there shouldn't be any problem. But she wasn't like Canis. She didn't need that illusory freedom. Even when she was in Korea, she was a slave to capitalism, and the important thing now was to warm her stomach. If she were to become a slave now, she would have to become a slave in a wealthy noble house. He returned to his palace, and she was handed over to the managing servant. But when she ran in, she was stopped and pulled away by the servant, but luckily he freed her. Seeing the child he brought back, the steward had to take her to get cleaned up first. She was bathed in a tub full of soap and dressed in beautiful clothes. She stayed at the palace but had no role. They'd hoped she would explain why he brought her there. In the original story, Candace voluntarily became a maid, even though no one asked, but she claimed she was just the master's pet dog. Because the prince said he would raise a stray dog, she didn't hesitate to call herself a pet dog. Being a puppy, she had to stay by her master's side, so she was quickly taken to the prince's room. Seeing a large bed next to her, she quickly lay down on it. No matter how hard she worked, she couldn't achieve what she wanted. But she would forget it because she no longer had to worry here. Although it wasn't great being a prince's slave, since she knew his personality well, she would participate in the next game event regardless. Nothing would happen, so she would not think or do anything anymore. From now on, her motto was to live like a dog. The fate of a dog would bring luck. At this moment, the prince returned and was surprised to see a little girl lying on his bed. He asked her what she was doing there, and Eugen unhesitatingly said she was a pet dog. She was a dog and he wanted to tame her. Dogs usually stayed by their master's side, but he didn't allow dogs on his bed, so he quickly called someone to bring a kennel, which made Eugen panic and fear not knowing what was happening. In this palace, there were no kennels except for the stables, so did that mean the steward had to put her in a wooden box and take her to the garden? But he said a room would suffice, so Eugen was taken to another room. She lay down that night thinking about how Prince Michael ignored Candace at the beginning of the game. However, he was kinder than she thought, and for him, the trouble would start from her. He felt sorry for the beast men he saw in the play. Annette, with black hair and black eyes, was a woman of unknown identity and origin, but there was no one like her in the world, and she appeared in the middle of a marriage. The emperor of the Imperator Empire had the heart of Dietrich. When Annette appeared, the emperor already had an empress. For the emperor, the most sacred thing was the engagement promise, and the birth of princes and princesses did not matter. The scandal began when the emperor killed the empress in a fake carriage accident. Michael was entrusted to a steward to raise him properly, and every day he had to learn how to be an emperor, study ancient languages and military science. The emperor's son, Michael, was considered a genius, but the emperor still wanted him to study more to become a comprehensive emperor. The servants felt sorry for him because he had to study so much, but the emperor thought it was not enough. One day, he had geometry and geography classes, and in the evening, he had a session with a philosopher scheduled for the morning. In the afternoon, he had military law and astronomy, and military studies included outside visits to learn tactics and horseback riding. The teachers were worried that this process would be too much even for an adult, yet Michael handled it without any problems. Everyone did not know what the prince had lost by having to devote himself to such heavy studies. He chose the strategy of wiping out an entire village when there was only one spy, as it was the most effective in war. He quickly got involved in court affairs, which was part of the agenda, and he had to take responsibility for his decisions. Seeing how he handled matters, the emperor was completely confident in entrusting him with this responsibility. To please the beautiful Annette, as his father the emperor wished, he went to adopt a beast man. From the first time they met, Michael's gaze showed a lack of respect. He didn't even know who she was. If he only expressed feelings and trust in such a disrespectful manner, he was just a master. He thought raising a dog wouldn't be a bad thing either. This morning, he enjoyed his breakfast while thinking about the dog he had just brought back. He was somewhat angry when he saw that the steward did not care much about taking care of his dog. The dog's room was the one he used as a playroom. Budget drafts related to the maid would be handled quickly. Then the steward took out a collar from the store, saying that if a slave escaped or rebelled, the collar could explode, but its intensity was too weak for him, and he would need to create a much stronger one. At this moment, she was facing his questioning because last time he had seen her pass by the royal bedroom without permission. Wandering around was very dangerous, so he had to ensure she did not leave this palace. This was a collar, and as a slave, she needed to know the rules in the royal household. How could she not know about this? This restraining room he had prepared for her was meant for the main character. She couldn't believe she liked something that could track her position. Maybe the previous main character didn't like it, but for her, it was something that ensured her safety. He was surprised that she trusted him enough to wear it without hesitation. He knew how people talked badly about him behind his back. They said he was a terrifying, cold-blooded tyrant, and it wasn't wrong, so he didn't want to deny it. But he didn't understand why she would trust someone like him as her master. Did this girl not even have basic survival instincts? He thought he had to keep her in the palace, so she couldn't go to dangerous places. He created many barriers in the bedroom instead of bombs, emergency escape switches, or cold insulation. The steward didn't understand when the hare's defensive tools had become such restraints. She looked at a table full of delicious food in front of her, and the servants continued to take care of her. In the game, she and the prince were the same age, so now that the prince was 16, she would be a little younger. Maybe because she hadn't eaten well enough to grow, she didn't look her age, so everyone thought she was a child and treated her kindly, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. After eating, she felt sleepy again even though she had already slept a lot, but she didn't care and lay down anyway as she had nothing else to do. She felt that the life of a dog was truly wonderful, just eating and sleeping all week long. There was no one to talk to, and she needed to do something much more interesting. She looked outside and quickly left the palace. How long had it been since she last went outside during the day? It had been so long since she moved around that she felt a bit tired, so she went to the water pavilion to sit and rest a bit. The prince was in a meeting discussing which territory the project would be carried out on. He knew he shouldn't waste time listening to these people argue because the prisoner case was still unresolved, and he had to face a new issue. Like those nobles who only cared about their own interests, they were truly useless and incompetent. He thought he needed to reform the government apparatus, and at that moment, he walked straight to the water pavilion. Seeing her asleep in there, he knew this was his private space, and no one was allowed to enter. They thought he would be angry when he saw this, but unexpectedly, he quickly dismissed his servants. He didn't forget to tell them to bring a blanket or something soft, but not too thick to cover her. He looked at her sleeping and felt she was so carefree and resembled an adorable puppy, a puppy that fell asleep while waiting for its master. When she woke up, she felt refreshed in the morning without the repetitive work and pressure anymore. No more damned weekly reports, so the morning was truly refreshing. She wondered where she should explore today and decided to go out to the garden again. Unexpectedly, she saw a horse with a flowing mane and exclaimed that it was truly perfect. She fed it some apples and noticed a boy standing behind the barn door, watching her secretly. The boy thought she was a horse thief sneaking in and stood there on guard. But truly, no thief could be this incompetent to sneak in like that. This boy was Hans, and he was learning how to manage the stables from his uncle Bernard. For the first time, she saw someone in the palace who didn't notice the restraining collar she wore around her neck. There was no need to tell a kid that she was actually a slave. She felt lucky to have found a good master, and was now enjoying the life of a royal pet dog. She didn't think she needed to explain the details, so she just introduced her name. The boy then led her inside to tell her the names of the horses, marking the start of another new adventure. The master's territory was also her territory. When were pets ever allowed to decide whether they could enter a room or not? She had decided, so she went to the prince's study to have a snack. She thought that if they didn't want the dog to come in, they should have closed the door. Naturally, a normal dog opening a closed door was hard to avoid. She didn't think she liked sweets, but his study was always full of snacks. Anyway, it was best to eat them before they went stale. The servants came in and saw her happily eating, reminding each other not to leave the dog's food out before going back out. She ate her fill in the study and then started thinking about where to go today. She felt very tired from exploring and gradually grew bored, so she naturally missed her phone and wanted to play games. Before she had a phone, she didn't understand what everyone played, so she took the liberty to ask a passing servant. Fortunately, when she stepped into the library, all the books were in Korean. Of course, this was a Korean game. Sometimes she felt a bit strange because, although their faces were not Korean, they spoke in Korean, especially the prince, and she couldn't help but feel embarrassed when she thought about how handsome he was. At this moment, she turned around and saw the prince sleeping on a chair. He looked quite tired that day. He hadn't become a father yet but was already shouldering great responsibilities. Although he seemed mature, He was still quite young. She thought he was having a nightmare as he whimpered softly, and she didn't know if she should wake him up. She didn't know where her limits were, but as a pet, she didn't need to worry about such things. This was the moment in the game when the prince would be comforted, and she was surprised that her body temperature kept her close. However, this didn't mean she wanted to comfort him. She just sat beside him because it would soothe him more. If this could dispel his nightmares, it was just a strange coincidence. She unknowingly fell asleep, and her head rested on his shoulder, waking him up. Not only that, she instinctively wrapped her arms around him and gave him a warm hug, making contented sounds. She unconsciously murmured that this place was warm, and he gently patted her head with affection. She had a nightmare about having to go to work and waking up at 7 a.m. because of the annoying alarm clock. She tried to wake up, but to her surprise, he was right in front of her. His eyes were close to hers, and she angrily asked herself what the heck was going on. She didn't understand why she was lying on the prince's lap, and the scene was extremely ambiguous. He wanted to reach out to pat her head to comfort her, but she refused. His face showed a bit of sadness, which made her feel slightly guilty. She knew she had taken advantage of his kindness, but sometimes he should enjoy the privileges of raising a pet. She found the feeling very pleasant and was getting sleepy, but she remembered she had something to ask. Despite this, his gentleness made her fall asleep again, and he was very satisfied with this. The next day arrived, and she was of age to ride her horse, Tinker Bell, around the garden. She had done well by asking him instead of sleeping. There was a beautiful brown horse in the stable she also wanted to ride, and he agreed. Words were important, even if everything else wasn't. When approaching someone else's pet, you must first ask their guardian. She nodded, satisfied with this, and couldn't help but smile, knowing she had done the right thing. After taking the horse back and kissing it goodbye, even though she wanted to ride more, her legs were incredibly sore. As she passed the stable, she saw a hammock and a wooden swing. She planned to set up the hammock in her hiding spot and take a nap. She went to his water pavilion but couldn't understand why her shoe kept slipping off, even though she had tied it many times. Even after switching to a different tree, it was the same, so she decided to abandon the hammock and set up the swing instead. She saw a high branch and thought hanging the swing there would be perfect, but she didn't know that he had slowly approached and saw the items scattered on the ground. The steward predicted that someone was trying to hang the hammock and swing on the tree. Without a ladder, it would be difficult to tie it with such a long rope. Unexpectedly, he looked up at the tree and ordered his soldiers to cut it down immediately. When she returned and saw the tree had been chopped down, she was very shocked. She didn't understand what had happened and was on the verge of tears. She remembered that there was a dense ancient forest in front of her, but now she felt strangely unfamiliar. Looking again, she saw it was a playground he had created for her, with some items even gilded. On the table were her favorite snacks, adorable sweets. This touched her heart, and she felt the place was wonderful. The pet benefits were excellent, and this became her favorite spot. A few days later, she brought a book titled Songs from the Blue Sea to lie on the hammock. She was very surprised when she first saw these picture books in the study. The picture book opened up to reveal many magical illustrations, with scenes that floated like a real animation. The author was truly a genius, so she quickly ran inside to get another book. But when she ran past a room, she saw puppets inside. This was the first time she had seen this place and realized there were still many areas she hadn't explored. These are commemorative victory paintings, and they look very simple, depicting beast men who were not victorious yet portrayed larger. She pushed the door open and saw that it was a room, but there was nothing special inside. She walked in and approached the piano, which looked very similar to the ones on Earth. Imitating a passionate pianist, she started to look around the room again. The piano and bookshelf made her remember that this was the place with the secret passage, but as she thought she was overthinking it, she opened the secret door. She was pulled deep inside, and now the entire palace was in an uproar searching for her. The royal magician was coming to find her using magic, but tracking her position yielded no results. The steward was terrified because, according to his orders, he had to watch over and protect the dog, and now this had happened. Taking care of the puppy was quite difficult as there were many unexpected preparations. First, they needed to know what snacks she liked to eat and where she was to bring food to her. If she fell asleep somewhere, they would have to go there to bring her back, and the prince himself would ensure she returned safely to her warm bed. Wandering leisurely, the puppy always showed a calm face. He remembered her figure and vowed to find her soon. The magical function embedded in the collar was meant for such situations. The magician had arrived, and the device on her collar wasn't responding, which made him extremely angry. More precisely, she was reacting, but it was blocked somewhere and couldn't send the position, as if it was being magically interfered with. Normally, such cases could indicate kidnapping, and he was furious because he had hired a high-priced magician from the other world. He dared to see who had the guts to do such a thing, so he immediately ordered all the soldiers to come here to find her. Whoever dared to do this behind his back, if he caught them, he would tear them into 12 pieces. She looked around in fear, feeling that there wasn't a hint of light. This place was indeed dark, and she realized there was something soft. Was it a glowing stone, or did it start glowing because she touched it? It seemed to work like a hot pack, but she had no idea where she was. She couldn't even see an escape device, but she was still the prince's pet. If she disappeared, surely someone would come to find her, right? For now, she decided to wait. People often said that if you become a lost child, staying in one place would reduce the chances of being found. She didn't understand why it kept getting darker. Was it because the more she used the stone, the dimmer it got? This was not good because if even this light disappeared, she wouldn't be able to see what was ahead. First, she decided to move, thinking that a secret passage meant for escape must lead to a safe place. She thought everything would be okay, she just had to keep going and endure a bit more to see the outcome. Suddenly, she saw the exit, and to her surprise, there was a cat in front of her. She couldn't believe it was a tiger cub, which circled around her nonstop. This was Kun as a young cub, appearing in the game in his adult form. He didn't have a major role in the game, but because he was a primary illustration, he was very detailed. Was it the producer's personal intention to describe each strand of his fur so meticulously? Thinking about it, if this tiger was here, this must be Princess Raffles' palace. In the game, she was just a supporting character who appeared occasionally, and it was unclear whether she was an ally or an obstacle. She curiously looked at the cosmetics on the table, but they were actually chemical experiment materials. Next to them was a stack of documents, and unexpectedly, the princess appeared behind her. The stack of documents contained the song Songs of the Blue Sea, and the princess was its author. She excitedly shared her feelings about reading that work, and the two enjoyed cakes together on the couch. She couldn't believe that the girl who appeared midway would play such a role, and that even in a dream, it would become a premonition. Now, the princess realized that this was the rumored child from a few days ago. But when she put a piece of cake in her mouth, she cried out in surprise, which made the princess very angry because the chef had not met her standards. The princess didn't want an incompetent chef who couldn't satisfy a child's taste. But unexpectedly, she said that it was delicious because it was both spicy and sweet, something she hadn't tasted in a long time since it was a Korean dish. The princess called it a colorful fruit, and there were plenty in storage, so she could eat as much as she liked. If she liked it, the princess would take her to her storage, which had many sweet fruits and drinks. After leaving the princess's room, she heard the news that everyone was urgently looking for her. It reminded her that she had been outside for quite a while, and the prince was probably very worried about her. But she thought that couldn't be true because she wasn't even the main character. Although a bit sad, she needed to leave now, and the princess would personally take her there. The princess also had something to say to her brother, so they returned to the prince's palace together. There, a storm of anger was brewing because he was not satisfied with losing his possession. It had been a long time since he ordered the servants to find clues, but they still hadn't found anything. He raised his sword to the servant's neck, thinking if they were so useless, they were no longer of any use. The steward, who previously felt fortunate to work continuously in the palace with the prince, was now utterly terrified and felt extremely foolish. Unlike the emperor's palace, where there were many tasks, no one had ever lost their life in the prince's palace, but now things had changed. Just as the sword was about to fall, her voice calling out "Master" rang out behind him. From his perspective, except for being a bit dusty, she didn't seem to be injured. She felt an atmosphere of death, sensing that many people were focusing on her. At times like this, she didn't know what to do, and the princess felt it was a real mess. The princess stood behind her, looking at her brother with a judgmental gaze. She said that she had brought his pet dog back and had something to discuss with him. At this moment, he realized that she had been in the princess's palace, but he didn't understand how she got there. It turned out that the princess wanted to talk about bringing his dog to her palace for care and nurturing. She said that since she already had a tiger cub, perhaps she could become the princess's kitten, but unexpectedly, the prince immediately pulled her behind him. He said that she had just befriended the princess and her tiger cub. First, the princess came to talk to him because she was marked by the prince's seal. It would be more vibrant and adorable if the princess's seal adorned it instead. The princess wanted to add silver strap designs around the collar to fit her neck perfectly, but he said he was busy and couldn't see any guests off, and the princess shouldn't touch his belongings. She could only reluctantly release the tiger cub in her hand, letting it run back to its master. The princess knew there was no way now, so she had to wait for another opportunity. She was taken back to the prince's palace. She didn't understand why she was brought to his room when she wanted to go to her room and clean up. She couldn't understand why he showed a dismissive expression. If she didn't go to the study, he wouldn't have specifically looked for her. She couldn't comprehend his expression. In the original story, even if Canis didn't want to listen, the character still exhibited all its traits. If he wasn't obsessed with her that way, perhaps she wasn't the main character. At that moment, he asked why she was in his palace and returned with the princess. Regarding that matter, she had a lot to say, so she eagerly explained how she fell into the secret bookshelf. Finally, he let her rest and went to take care of business in his study. He summoned the captain of the knights and told the steward to open the entrance in his room and clean the adjacent room. "But isn't that room reserved for the crown princess?" the steward asked. The prince had grown accustomed to living alone and couldn't trust those who didn't perform their duties properly. He couldn't leave her alone in another room, as he wasn't using that room anyway. If she stayed in the adjacent room, she could live comfortably and he could check on her at any time. She looked at the beautiful room she had just been moved to, and even her favorite pillow was brought along. A pet's living quarters must be to the owner's liking, but the bed in this new room was even bigger and softer. Just as she heard a noise and thought her meal had arrived, two strangers appeared at the door. They greeted her, knowing she was the prince's pet dog, and introduced themselves as her escorts per the prince's orders. One of them was the knight Harden. She just felt that these people were really too cool, so she politely greeted them in return. She did what she had learned, even though she didn't know if it was right or wrong. One person was a genius in swordsmanship with a tall and strong build, but this greeting seemed a bit too formal, which annoyed the person next to him. Felix and Harton were invited to sit and even stay for dinner with her. If allowed, they would be willing to stay with her. She was very happy to have knights dine with her tonight. It had been a long time since she had eaten with so many people, which was really enjoyable, especially dining with super cool knights. As a knight, one should be careful about eating too many sweets, but to replenish strength, a bit of sugar is necessary. Although Harton was a very serious senior who adhered to the knight spirit, he was also quite gluttonous. The sharp-looking knight was weak against sweet desserts. Strawberries with fresh cream and thick cakes were very sweet, so she proactively invited him to try a piece. After all, these were the sweet treats that knights needed, but at that moment she got some on her nose. Harton told her to wait a moment and gently wiped it off for her. Even her boyfriend had never done these things for her. Felix looked at her and realized she was a very perceptive child. She was daydreaming about the gallant and elegant knight Harton. When Felix saw her eyes meet his, he quickly winked, only to be met with her turning away in disdain. Being blatantly discriminated against like that was quite cute. Although he didn't like the task, it wasn't too bad. From the beginning, it wasn't that he felt sorry for the child, but he felt it was a pity for Knight Harton to waste his time and talent in a place like this. He had shown his swordsmanship skills in the provinces and the capital from an early age. In everyone's eyes, Harton was an undisputed talent and the youngest knight appointed. He dared to attack Yibon alone and received countless praises for each mission he was dispatched to. He was an undefeated legend, and when he first joined the knights he was very angry, because the person he always admired was treated poorly by other knights. Due to a lowly background, he had always tried his best to excel in the difficult tasks assigned to him with his strength. Unexpectedly, he was assigned to escort the puppy by the prince's order. Contrary to his expectations, it wasn't about showing off that he had the special attention of the royal family. Harton was even specially brought hot chocolate by her to drink. Doing that only showed a shameful act, although later on, he had to use that method too. The three of them didn't hesitate to play Monopoly together, and surprisingly she completely lost to Felix. Though she usually fared better in other games, she was entirely defeated in Monopoly. Typically, people buy private houses and valuable items depending on the family's status. However, in this game, if one spends more than they earn, they will quickly go bankrupt. The three played happily together, and her life in the royal palace had become significantly more enjoyable. The prince also wondered why the number of sweets hadn't decreased at all recently. This morning he received a request to dispatch the captain of the Royal Knights from Count Baron. The count wanted to send members of the Royal Knight team, and this was an urgent plan. He wanted to go to where Baron was training the soldiers because he also wanted to relax his muscles. Outside the arena were people practicing combat, and Yujin was watching attentively. Not only that, but she also clapped happily because her eyes were immensely benefited. He didn't expect such a service existed, so he quickly went to check it out. Harton was meticulously cared for by her. Even the sweat towel after training was brought to him. This little girl didn't even notice the prince and was only engrossed with her handsome guy. The atmosphere where Michael stood was frozen because he was furious that she didn't pay attention to him. Baron rushed to welcome the prince, fearful because he saw the murderous look on his face. He quickly mentioned that he had seen the request from the count and currently they needed an outstanding knight. It was a waste to have a knight of such caliber merely escort a pet. This was a difficult task that required an outstanding royal knight. He approved this matter clearly, whereas previously, he completely disagreed with it. He had to remind him that among the excellent knights mentioned was Knight Harden. However, he only saw the increasing importance of the case compared to before, especially the significance of missions traveling to local areas. Seeing the child clinging to the knight like that might cause the knight to lose his judgment. Seeing his senior dispatched for several days, Felix cried in sorrow every day, giving her quite a headache. It was pitiful because Harton was recognized for his talent, which was why he was sent on the mission. If he were truly a junior, he should be praying for his success. But seeing him cry like that, wouldn't she also feel lonely? Long ago, in her heart, she already had the image of that night. After hearing Felix's report about her not getting out of bed all day, he felt a bit annoyed. She reflected on herself while lying in bed, realizing that she had lived very diligently these past few weeks. Because of her infatuation with Harton, she had paused a bit. A diligent and sincere life truly wasn't Yujin. She had to force herself to remember that time was a killer, and each day should be wasted like a puppy. 3 meals a day with snacks provided, even the ability to borrow books from the library without limit. Compared to a 5-star hotel, the Royal Palace's room service was much better. She didn't even need to step out of her room. Unexpectedly, when her room was too messy, Michael came to visit her, much to her surprise. Indeed, she was very uncomfortable without Knight Harden, to the extent that she just stayed in her room like now. He asked her if she wanted to take a walk. Even if she called herself a puppy, she wasn't a real one. Just mentioning a walk made the prince feel he couldn't believe himself. Though it was a bit troublesome, the owner was the one who kept her alive. Seeing the pitiful face, she had to endure getting out of bed as a kind of reward. He was currently discussing business matters in the study regarding trade between Eastern families, and the princess had urgent matters to attend to. The important and urgent matter here was that the princess needed to feed her pet. The princess didn't forget to mention that by doing so the pets would know who their owner was. He couldn't help but compare this tiger to his own pet. Kun even got to choose toys, all of which were gifts for it. Watching the tiger play with the toys he had bought for the princess put him in a very good mood. Seeing this scene, Michael's thoughts changed, and he came up with a plan for himself. Yujin looked at the shiny items in front of her with great interest, thinking there must be some special event. But he only said she needed to choose one that she liked, though she still didn't understand what this was for. Finding it troublesome to choose, she thought he needed her to pick for him, so she only needed to choose what her master liked. All the items were expensive, making it extremely difficult to choose. She quickly picked a silk cloak, thinking it would suit him well. But he only felt that she didn't like any of these items. Seeing his expression, she thought she had made the wrong choice, and he was not satisfied with her selection. It seemed that from her expression, she wasn't picking anything useful for herself. Seeing the servant bowing continuously and apologizing to the prince, Yujin realized she had done something wrong. She decided to point from one end to the other, indicating to take all those items, wondering if this was too much or if she had made another mistake. Thanks to her master, she could try all these luxurious things. If she wanted, he could even have things produced exclusively for her. To her, this was being born to be super rich, and it was perfect. Decorating the royal palace uniquely with the newly bought items, she felt she had a modern and avant-garde artistic soul. Reflecting on it, all these things were bought by her master. If using the budget, it needed to be reported. She would show him the interior she had prepared. Seeing her outside the study door surprised him greatly. It had been a long time since she had come here on her own. If he startled her and made her run away, it wouldn't be good, so he decided to remain calm, pretending there was nothing to worry about. She saw him still working and decided to sit on a chair to wait until he was done. Unexpectedly, she fell asleep, and when he finished his work, he gently woke her by softly stroking her hair. After that, they went to her bedroom to take a look, but the butler mentioned that he would be very angry. Had she done something he didn't like, and what would the consequences be? She had decorated the place with gifts from her master. She couldn't believe it when he walked in and found a complete mess. To her, it was a concept of a happy and joyful resting space, and she had paid special attention to this arrangement. She used cacti instead of flowers for easier care and eagerly watched his reaction to this. The butler and the servants couldn't understand what was happening in such a dignified and majestic palace. Surely she would receive the prince's wrath, but unexpectedly, he just patted her head and praised her for doing a good job. She excitedly explained everything to him, leaving the butler astonished. There were highlight spots to admire stone statues, and the special feature was the unicorn there. Prince Michael seemed much gentler compared to in the game and always looked at her with affectionate eyes. He heard that the king wanted to build a pond for his beloved concubine, intending to destroy the royal garden immediately. If possible, he wanted it as close to the main palace as possible. The butler suggested building the pond on his own estate. If the king wished, he would immediately move the scenery and the fish there. He had been silent for too long, despite whatever his father did, finding it bothersome to deal with such arrogant actions. Those who were trusted by the previous king were still used as examples to enlighten the successors. He wanted to see the recent achievements of the families, so he ordered someone to fetch them. However, when his face was still looking scary, she suddenly opened the door and came in, and he accidentally let her see this terrifying face of her master. This was the first time she saw such a scary expression on her master, so horrifying that if she touched it wrongly, it would obliterate 3 generations of her ancestors. However, she felt very familiar, as if she had seen it somewhere before. It was his default expression in the game, and although it had just started, she felt really awkward with that look in the game. She thought that perhaps the frivolous emperor had caused another incident, making him clean it up. Reflecting on it, her parents had passed away early due to an accident, but she had received much love from them before that. Because his guardian looked like that, he had no place to rely on. After all, he was still young, but had to bear a lot of pressure. She thought about helping him relieve his mood because keeping it inside constantly was not good at all. Although it was very rare in the game, during sweet events, instead of his face, his ears would quickly turn red. Anyway, she would lie there and let him pet her as much as he wanted, thinking this could help improve his mood a lot. Even though there wasn't much response, he always cared about the times she talked to herself. Her master always paid attention and remembered even the trivial words that the speaker had forgotten. A few days later, she still remembered Harden and wondered how many days he had been gone. During this time, she had read all the books available and played all the games with Felix, but her mood didn't improve at all. While looking at the sky, she suddenly thought about visiting Kun, so the two of them quickly went to the princess's palace. However, Felix was ordered not to let her go outside, so he told her to quickly return to her seat. He was just doing his job well, so she had to quickly submit to this. If you are His Highness's pet, then act like a pet and obediently stay in this palace. But just as the two of them were about to argue, they heard someone at the door. It was Harden. He had stopped by to report on his mission before returning, so he came to greet everyone. She quickly ran to hug Harden after missing him during the days they were apart. Though the protected person could be anywhere, his mission was to ensure that person's safe travel. Threatening the protected person in the palace made Harton alarmed by Felix's attitude. He ordered Felix to quickly go outside and check which carriage was still usable, and at the same time, send someone to inform the princess's palace before they arrived. Felix didn't expect that his senior would return at that moment. For him, her temperament was truly hot-headed, making him play the role of the villain. He did this only for her good, and had no ill intentions. The servant came from a noble family, in the royal palace where even the servants were commoners or middle class. The status of a child as a slave meant that if she left the palace, no matter how much the prince cared, he couldn't ensure her safety. Even if he could promptly prevent danger, he couldn't protect her from the wounds left by words. A few days ago, someone had pinched her cheek and said she wasn't even a great beauty. She analyzed this troublesome person while he said maybe it was the prince's first time encountering a slave, hence his curiosity. He was a nobleman and was shocked when she dared to ignore him while he was talking, showing utter disregard for authority by relying on the prince's favor. After all, she was the prince's pet, so His Highness could be generous and tolerant of her. While he was rambling on, oblivious to his surroundings, he didn't realize the prince had been standing behind him the whole time. After that incident, he was severely punished, leaving Felix very troubled. He had intentionally pulled her outside just to get her to exercise a bit and then leave for a while, not expecting her to get into trouble so quickly. Other knights didn't dare say a word when facing nobles, yet she dared to act like that. After hearing about that nobleman, no one in the palace dared to treat this child like that anymore. But the problem was that the next day, the nobility warned to be more careful of slave girls, and rumors about her began to spread. Of course, this was not good for her. Even though she pretended to be calm, she was surely very scared. Moreover, the bold child was visiting the princess's palace for the first time. If she accidentally entered the emperor's palace, it would not be good at all. But after that, she went to the princess's palace, and Kun quickly jumped on her excitedly. It had grown visibly larger, and the princess could see that her mood had improved a lot. But after hearing everything she said, the princess thought that man was really bold and should be beheaded immediately. However, that was just a joke because royal law was very strict, so of course you couldn't just behead a duke's son over something like that. However, the princess could send him to a place from which he would never return. In fact, some noblemen wanted to fly to the sky carrying a lot of gunpowder to reach the stars. If her little kitten wanted, she would be willing to do something similar, like sending him to the hot desert or a monster's cave, or even the icy wall of death would be good. But Eugen interrupted her violent thoughts. She asked the princess about the blue sea flowers mentioned in the Song of the Blue Sea. She really liked that part because she loved the water. Before quitting her job, she often went swimming in the pool and soaked in the cool water. So today the princess decided to take her to a place, and unexpectedly, they went to Michael to ask about the lake the emperor wanted to build. Due to the objections of that woman, the path to it had been changed to a private road for the lake near the royal palace. But he was annoyed because he had directed and completed that road, yet the one thanked was the princess. She wanted to swim there because she usually went boating and picnicking, but swimming was always indispensable. When the princess wanted to prepare swimming gear for her, the prince stepped in to take care of it, saying, "My puppy, I will handle this myself." There's no need for the princess to intervene. He was just trying to prevent any impure motives from someone or anyone who wanted to casually take a look at others' things. She was always uneasy about Felix, but today when he held her hand, she had grown accustomed to this comfort. Having experienced many storms in society, she was used to the harsh conditions of the world. She had thought she had long since discarded her faith in humanity. Now, after truly becoming a pet, that trust had returned. This was the reassurance in the relationship between a pet and its owner. Humans can abandon and betray each other at any time, but pets do not. Therefore, their owners do not abandon their pets, and now she was allowed to remove her collar. However, this collar, in the game, he never allowed Canis to remove it. Canis taking it off might have been due to going the wrong way, and perhaps the things she used out there had pointed her in the wrong direction. So those who caused Canis to go astray might need to be punished because while she was away, they only sat there and watched. Since the moment she removed the collar and left, now she needed to do something to punish the servants kneeling there. After that, those servants were also executed, so this collar was a symbol of obsession. It was also proof of ownership, but why did he now agree to let her remove it? She couldn't believe it and had to ask him again to confirm. She didn't understand if it was because things hadn't started yet, or if she wasn't the main character. Instead, he gave her something that symbolized she was his servant. She didn't need to do the work of a servant and just had to wear it where it could be seen. But she still didn't understand what was happening. Was she about to be abandoned? Now, he reached out to help her remove the collar, but she quickly held onto it and said she didn't like it. She didn't like removing it at all because she was her master's pet. She screamed that she would never leave, so they absolutely should not sever their relationship. It was him who made her adapt to life as it is now, only to want to abandon her. She had just admitted that being with him made her feel secure, and then he did this. Faced with her anger, he could only gently pull her back and hug her to comfort her. He thought that from being a slave to becoming a servant, her status had clearly improved, so why was she still sad and unwilling? But no matter what, she was still his little puppy. She was both silly and adorable, not knowing if there was any danger, but she felt safe in his arms. The warmth she longed for was here now, and he had ordered the butler to throw away the servant badge. He wondered what to do to get her to remove the collar because he couldn't guard against the nobles as before. Since she didn't want the servant position, he thought of a new way. The next day in his office, he was listening to the progress of anti-famine measures in Traha, which were going well. Ensuring the budget was used reasonably and not falling short was crucial. But at this moment he asked him about his curiosity about his puppy. Indeed, trouble came from the mouth. He wished he had known about Viscount Roland's matter earlier and not been so casually curious. After touching the prince's puppy, he had lost an arm and disappeared from the capital without a trace. He said she was staying in the room next to his, which was close to being equal to a crown princess. This major event and news would surely cause a stir, so the nobles had to quickly report this to their close ones. She was currently enjoying a batch of sweets from a royal chef from across the desert. If she visited the princess's palace, she could enjoy it any time. This displeased the prince, but because of the princess, he couldn't keep her confined forever. The two of them were sitting in a pavilion drinking water, watching her play with toys and Kun by the beach. He couldn't take away her hobbies and now sat there watching her play. Kun saw the toy in her hand and couldn't help but rush over to grab it. The princess quickly saw this and rushed over to save her. He had jumped directly into the water to save her, making him soaking wet, but at that moment he felt very breathless. This was because she hugged him to thank him, but this was just her doing her duty as a pet. Dogs usually express gratitude by hugging, so even though she quickly let go, it was the first time. Before, she occasionally walked around him and approached him but never hugged him. He smiled and said that saving her was a matter of course, then hugged her. She shyly ran into the carriage to avoid him. Perhaps she was still scared from just falling into the water, which made her heart race so fast. There was no other reason for it, or maybe she was just surprised by his expression. Even though she had played a lot, she had never seen that expression before. Today Felix had proactively come to apologize to her, as pride was nothing. If something had happened at that moment, he wouldn't have known what to do. Though small, like a proud kitten, she always cared about him and his senior. She feared that the escort mission would delay the knight's training, so she created an opportunity for him and his senior to have a sparring session, and also let him know about the nuisances bothering his senior. When his senior didn't believe in his popularity in high society, she always complimented him, which made him much more enthusiastic. Though she was just a child, she still tried to take care of those around her with her own hands. So this time, he had to try his best because he had overreacted by imagining many scenarios. Since he apologized like that, she would be kind and generous in accepting his apology. Afterwards, though a bit awkward, they invited each other for tea and cakes. After all, Felix and she were almost always together. It was good to reconcile with each other. He didn't understand how she could lie there for hours doing nothing. She turned to look at him because she had a feeling he was watching her. Even though she wanted to thank him, he just sat there without moving. Now, since her master was still young, he didn't feel anything, but this wasn't good for his neck and wrists, nor was it good for his joints. Not wanting him to sit like that, she stood up and told him that she wanted to go for a walk. The butler and the servants were surprised when she did this, but what was there to be surprised about? She just wanted to get the prince to move his body a bit. The two of them walked in the garden, and she wondered why he had so much work. Being the prince of the empire meant he had to do a lot, but didn't this world have any concept of child labor laws? Probably not, which is why they exploited children's labor like that, making her very angry. In such a vast empire, was he the only one who could handle all the work? In an organization, if a cog is missing, it can still function, but why was the entire country dependent on one person? Additionally, which country has a law that adults must dump all their work on their children? The heartless emperor handed over all his work to his underage son, while he only cared about having fun. But suddenly, she remembered that this was a crime of insulting the royal family. He was protecting the first gift she had given him, so no one was allowed to touch it. She had given him a plate of cakes, but to the butler, His Highness hated strong flavors, whether salty or sweet. When she left, the butler had to quickly bring black tea, but he said it was delicious. The butler said that this was a lie. Surely he cherished her more than the butler thought, to the point of lying. This was a fact even the veteran head butler, Bartle, didn't know. Sometimes emotions even change one's senses, and this was the second time she made cakes since she came here. Princess Raphael also sent maids to help at that time, so she had to thank them properly. She brought some to the princess, not knowing if the princess would like them. Harton also ate Felix's fairy cakes, which were soft with sweet cream that tasted just right. Felix was praised just from the first dish, so he might indeed have a talent for cooking. Fortunately, she reminded him not to brag anymore. After an argument between Felix and her, his face turned red. At this moment, she went to the princess's waiting room, but the princess was currently entertaining guests. While waiting, she saw a large table of snacks, but she remembered she had just finished eating. She needed to wait a bit before she could eat more. But what caught her eye now was a bottle of purple liquid on the table. She thought it was perfume, but when she opened it, the scent made her unconsciously want to drink it. After drinking it, she suddenly felt dizzy and collapsed to the ground. When she woke up, she found herself tiny, standing on the table. The princess finally finished her meeting and came out but didn't see her anywhere. Seeing the empty bottle spilled on the floor, the princess guessed what had happened. The princess had created a shrinking potion, but didn't expect it to work so quickly. Now she had to lift Eugen onto her hand. The princess was delighted and pampered her, seeing her like a little fairy. This was a shrinking spell the princess had created, and today Eugen would have to stay here so the princess could help her return to normal. The princess prepared everything for her to stay the night, promising to make the antidote as quickly as possible, so Eugen should wait a little bit. Eugen burrowed through a tunnel in the cake, feeling like a little mole. She played happily in the cake but faced danger from the chocolate sauce inside, calling out for him unconsciously. He sensed that something was missing today. When His Highness mentioned her, he was told she had gone to see the princess. However, when Felix said she would be staying there overnight, the prince couldn't stand it anymore and quickly rode his horse to the princess's palace.